Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Transformation podcast. And it is my great pleasure, and I'm not just saying this hyperbolically, but the great pleasure to have Dr. Keith Witt back. And Dr. Keith is a shining star in the integral world, and he is one of the most learned psychologists that I've ever had the pleasure to know. He has decades of experience clinically working with people and a studies and reads hard and has theoretical and all the kind of learning you could get from studying books down. And I have been working with him on a weekly, monthly group that we do for integral life called Integral Psychotherapy Group or something like that. And I've just come to really appreciate Keith's contribution. And Keith has authored more books than God, lots of them. Or if you're of a non-dual understanding, you might say that Keith is God writing. Okay. So thank you, God, and thank you, Keith. And today is my understanding. The issue is going to be talking about post-issue relationships from a pretty high developmental level. And one of the big contributions that I think the integral uprising movement thing that's come through Ken Wilber and the rest of us has been working on this has been the idea of adult development. And we go through stages, and I've been studying this for years now, decades now, and largely I've read the books, but I've also read the people. I've asked a lot of questions to people from all over the place and listened to their answers. It's given me a kind of a deep intuitive understanding that we're basically on the right track with developmentalism. So with all that, Keith, welcome. Thank you for being here.
I am honored to be on this show. I love your podcast, and I'm delighted to be here with you guys.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I don't know about God writing your books, but but you have published a lot of books. You're one of these annoying people who write faster than I can read, but it's good stuff. So thank you for your good work, Keith. And you'd wanted to talk about post-issue relationships, which, as I understand, is a possibility for all of us to move towards, working towards a place where we move relatively smoothly through the inevitable challenges of intimacy and connection and relationships. So maybe you could give us a sense of what you mean by that.
Yes. Early in my career, I recognized that everything is relationships with the different parts of ourselves, with other people, with nature, with our past, present, and future, with spirit. Everything's relationships. And the most complex relationship that I'm aware of is the pair bond relationship. You can call it the modern marriage, but it's the pair bond relationship. And any therapist who's working with anybody wants to help people have better relationships. It doesn't matter whether you're a coach or a teacher or a therapist. At this core of what you're doing is you're wanting to help people have better relationships. And like John said, increasingly psychology over the last 100 years has had more and more of a developmental and an evolutionary orientation. And that's not surprising. Psychology is a young science. It's only 150 years old. I mean, chemistry, mathematics, medicine, they're thousands of years old. Psychology, only 150 years. It's been growing throughout the last 150 years and through our lifetime. And we've participated and contributed to that. And I've done probably over 75,000 therapy sessions in my career, and about a third of them have been with couples. And anytime that I'm working with somebody, I have a vision of them relating and loving better with themselves, and relating and loving better with the people around them, and especially in a pair bond, relating and loving better with their partner. And all therapists are guides, and guides need to know the territory. You don't know exactly where you're going if you're a guide, but you need to know generally what's going on and where you're headed. And In relationships, and particularly the pair bond relationship, the modern marriage is a friendship, a love affair, and an ability to resolve issues, problems that arise. These are the three foundations of a modern marriage, a modern egalitarian marriage, which is a very recent thing. Really, the last 60 or 70 years has this become a thing for millions of people. And the more that couples develop in their ability to love each other, their more certain characteristics tend to stand out. One characteristic is that they become more emotionally intelligent. And emotional intelligence has been studied a fair amount. And generally, the more emotionally intelligent you are, the more you're moving towards an integral frame of mind, which is felt appreciation for multiple views, social referencing, less fear, more of a sense of ability to shift perspectives depending on the moment. As couples develop, they move in that direction. And when they have issues, as couples get better and better at loving each other, if they have issues in their friendship, their love affair, and their ability to solve problems, the more advanced couples feel those issues when they happen as a disruption, a disconnection in their relationship. That the main issue there, when something happens, somebody gets mad, for instance, anger separates, makes us want to attack, just like shame isolates. So if shame might isolate, or anger might separate, or fear separates us. So a couple has something like that happen, and they recognize there's a disconnection, and they want the connection back. And they know how to do it. Whatever the issue is, that's not as important as we want our connection back, and we know how to do it. Generally, what couples will do is they'll get back with some version of shared understanding, a little step forward, and then shared warmth. And couples that practice this get better and better at it. And as they get better and better at it, they have more and more post-issue moments where an issue shows up and they regulate it back to love effortlessly. For instance, she's backing out of the garage and she dings his car, okay? She walks inside and said, I was backing out of the garage and your car is a little farther over than it usually is, and I dinged it. And he goes, oh no, I love that car. I just got that car. I'll have to go fix. She goes, God, I'm sorry. He feels a little surge of anger. She just dinged his car. And she says, yeah, I'm sorry. And he goes, yeah, I understand. And nothing we can do about it. And I appreciate it. She says, I'll be more careful in the future. And he goes, yeah, I know. And that's it. Okay, that's an argument. That's that couple having an argument. Now, a couple that is not developed can start having an argument about that can last for 3 days. And interestingly, that argument that lasts for 3 days, and then they'll bring in your mother and and then the last time, and you never pay any attention, and I've told you not to do this. And why is such a big deal about your car? You love your car more than you love me, blah, 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 blah. That looks way more complex than what I described, and it's not. What I described is ridiculously complex. But in complexity theory, which is basically the core of evolution, when you go to another level of complexity, what characterizes it is it looks simpler and it's more energy efficient. And so something's frustrating for me, that couples will get to a place where they can do something like this, and they'll go, oh yeah, well, okay, well, that's great. And they'll go, well, I didn't realize how easy it was, so they don't do it all the time, but they'll do it more. And it's not that big a deal. Somebody will observe a couple doing it and they'll go, God, that's just effortless. They're not recognizing that that's a post-issue moment. And couples that have more and more of those and value those more and more become post-issue couples, where they don't let things get in the way of their love. And when it's consciously or unconsciously, all therapists, all coaches and change agents, teachers are guiding people in this direction. This is on the map. This is where we're headed. We're headed with this And we're not just headed this way interpersonally in the pair bond. And I'd like to talk more about the pair bond in a little bit, because I think that's super important. We're also headed this way intrapersonally. How do people grow internally? How do we integrate? It's been established to me, pretty much beyond a doubt, that we have a different self with almost every state of consciousness. This is the popularity of parts work in psychotherapy. Gestalt parts work was where I first encountered it, studying with my Gestalt teachers in the 70s. Internal family systems is kind of the current, part of it. All those different parts of us, and those different, characterized by different states. When we enter a defensive state, or when we get triggered for a trauma memory or something like that, there is a disconnection in our psyche. I'm sure you could find it in the brain if you had sophisticated enough instrumentation. But the bottom line is it's a disconnection. And then people will get engaged in maneuvers to try to avoid that, or to try to soothe that or something. When people learn it, however they learn it, and there's just lots of different ways of doing it, hundreds of ways. What ends up happening is they end up finding that spot and creating a positive connection between their executive self, particularly if they've done a lot of work, their wise self. Because I think that as we work, we develop more of an ego state that's a wise self, that the witness that observes with compassion. There's a caring connection with that spot that both includes it and guides it. And then there's a little integration, a little healing. And if you do that effectively with a trauma, you don't think about the trauma in the same way anymore. You remember it, but there's not that sting. Or if there's a shame, you don't think about it with the same shame anymore. What's happening? Your unconscious is learning how to integrate without you having to put conscious energy into it. You're developing more of a post-issue consciousness. And of course, I got into therapy because I find this process to be ridiculously magical and beautiful. I literally can't get enough of it. And it got even more urgent when I learned integral. Just a brief digression. Integral is a psychoactive system. I don't know, 25 years ago when I learned it, I had already done an awful lot of stuff, written some books, and felt pretty great about myself. In retrospect, Keith needed therapy and got it. But anyway, when I learned integral, it expanded my consciousness. And all of a sudden, these perspectives that were so great, came to me and I had to share them. How all the systems came together and created these new forms that were very, very beautiful. The reason why I've written, if you go to my website, everything's for free except one of my books. Those 10 books are all facets of a cosmology that kind of came to me during that time. And that's a healing cosmology that involves people evolving over time, and particularly in relationships, evolving towards post-issue moments. More post-issue moments you have, the more of a post-issue relationship you have, both interiorly in yourself and with other people. And so that's what I mean by post-issue relationships.
Whoa, okay. That's a great start. Boy, there's so many roads we can go here, Keith. You've pointed to kind of a parallel developmental systems, both within in the psyche, intrapsychic, and interpersonal. There's the possibility of learning, growing, practicing, working with issues, so they become increasingly automatic, and one becomes increasingly motivated towards to live in and grow in that direction. And so as a lot, what you've described is a kind of virtuous cycle of people individually and as couples learning how to work more effectively with the issues that life inevitably throws at us. I think one of the, in my naive youth, probably a year or two ago, I had the idea that at a certain stage, you'd be more or less issue free. Yeah,
Never
right. That
happened.
was a long time ago. I grew out of that one. Um, but what I realized was that there's no end to issues. The difference seems to be that everyone screws up, but wise people clean up.
Yes.
And you're describing a virtuous cycle within the psyche and within couples of learning how to do this more effectively and commit more to doing it together more effectively. So, and yet so many couples go through vicious cycles of increased reactivity and pain. What makes the difference?
Well, it helps to have an evolutionary understanding, I think. The pair bond started about 6 million years ago when we came out of the trees into the savannas of Africa. And humans became both ultra-social and a pair bond species, the only pair bond primate species. And that was necessary. You can't pick up a 2 or 3 year old and jump into a tree like a chimpanzee out on the savannah. You need to have a guy around who's going to be willing to die for his family. And this created families. And in these families were these little hierarchies, mom and dad and kids. And out of these families came the ancestral tribes. And these tribes had incredibly complex social arrangements and instincts to be able to be effectively social with each other. Almost our entire brain is wired for relationship. It's only a small part of the brain, this part, is just me separate from other people. Everything else is in relationship. And the social demands of these tribes is part of what drove neural development. Because you needed more neural territory to be able to deal with the sophistication of these social groups. The Dunbar number 150. These groups, some anywhere from a few to 150, were competing with each other and were out in the world. And so, as they evolved, the pair bond was always at the center. And in the pair bond, with a couple people and kids, there's hierarchy, and there's two different kinds of hierarchies to this day that we enter. One is a dominator hierarchy where people do things out of fear and somebody controls out of dominating, and then there's liberation and growth hierarchies where it's arranged for people to feel like it's fair and feel like they're being encouraged to develop. And to this day, basically all human institutions follow that model, the model of that nuclear family and that hierarchy, and then either more dominator or they're more growth hierarchies. Okay, so let's just all fast forward through the evolutionary history. But it's hard for me to fast forward because there's these points that just fascinate me. Like 200,000 years ago, there was a mutation on the FOXP2 gene on 2 sites of 714 sites that gave us the power of metaphor and grammar. One woman 200,000 years ago had that. That was such a powerful mutation of those 2 sites that now everybody in the world has that, because that was such an advantage. Metaphor, grammar, I, you, me, us, in the past, present, and future. And now 100,000 years ago, we see jewelry and burial rites. There's some evidence that 50 to 60,000 years ago, there was a famine in Africa and human beings self-domesticated. The people that had more capacity to collaborate and cooperate probably had an evolutionary advantage. And so the most recent morphological evolution is 11,000 years ago, if you can believe that, where we had more, there's a mutation that gives us more convolutions in our brain. I mean, evolution has been going and going and going. Social evolution has been going and going and going. The pair bond has been going, going and going. When agrarian society hit, there was an awful lot of dominator hierarchies that kind of took over for the next 10,000 years, the patriarchy. So first of all, I apologize to any women listening to this. I didn't personally do it the last 10,000 years, but I've certainly, as an old white guy, have benefited from it my whole entire life. And I feel a little bit of, guilt, just like colonialism, I guess. But anyway, there was a lot of dominator hierarchies happening. But with the liberation movements a couple 100,000 years ago, now we have more liberation and growth hierarchies. And this happened with the pair bond. So marriages weren't about women being bought and sold, and they weren't about the guy always being in charge. We began to have more equal power. Now, under those circumstances, the old instincts that we developed to maintain social harmony in a relationship, which was if you get threatened, somebody dominates, somebody submits, that kind of stuff. For instance, men are wired genetically to go seek isolation when they're mad. Women are motivated to go seek the company of other women. You can see the evolutionary value of that in a tribe. An angry guy might hurt somebody, so he goes off by himself. A distressed woman needs support. She would go find other women. So all these primitive things really kept the tribes together and competing. But now, the last 50, 60, 70 years, in these egalitarian equal power with sex and with money and with kids, child rearing, now there's these new potentials for love. There's these new potentials for problem solving. When somebody gets threatened, they enter a defensive state, and their instincts tell them to solve the problem with the old way, which is defensive states. A defensive state is, if you threaten me, my nervous system reads threat and will instantly instantiate a defensive state. That involves amplified or numbed emotions to prime me for action, distorted perspectives to support this action, because we're humans, we're always telling stories. So give yourself a story to support whatever I want to do, a destructive instinct to fight or flee, to submit or dominate, and diminished capacities for empathy and self-reflection. These are defensive states. And if I enter that defensive state, you'll feel threatened, and then you enter one, and then because all communication is complementary, we'll create a relational defensive pattern out of that. And this is what couples do. And then if you practice it, you get better and better at it. And if you look at the trauma research, I have one of my books is Trauma into Transcendence. What this does is it creates sensitization with couples where they get sensitized to the other person being threatening, and it requires less and less of a stimulus to create more and more of a response. And these relational defensive patterns, they build up momentum like a storm across the ocean. And on average, couples are having trouble about 6 years before they enter a therapist's office. Thanks a lot, you guys. I mean, I tell people, I sure wish you would have showed up here 10 years ago, because there's been an awful lot of damage. And they'll go, yeah, well, we didn't think of it. Go, okay, fine. So then we work with it. So they come in with these demanding capacities, these habitual passages that are primitive instincts coming through. And so my job is to teach them this capacity that now is available in equal power relationships with people that have developed enough cognitively and developed enough emotionally, have enough self-regulatory capacity that they can think about, yeah, I guess there's a part of me that's distorted. I mean, that requires a witness. People didn't even think about the unconscious until Freud talked about it 150 years ago. In one survey that was talking about the 5 biggest deal things that have happened, one of them was DNA, and one of the other ones was the unconscious. I'm distorted. I mean, that's such an evolutionary achievement of consciousness to be able to see that. And so if I can help somebody see that they're distorted, I go, okay, so what would you rather do? What are you really wanting beneath that defensive state? What are they always wanting? They're wanting to be connected in love. That's what I want. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, recognize that you want to make it all about the other person. Couples always come in knowing exactly what the problem is. The problem is she's not doing this or she's doing that. And that changes and everything's fine. He's not doing this, he's doing that. Everything changes and that's fine. And your job, Keith, is to help her change that stuff so that we'll be fine. Your job, Keith, is to help him. And I'll look at the couples and I'll say, hey, look, you're both right. You both are so right. Both of you have things that need to change to get where you want to go, which is to love each other more. And the first thing is when you enter one of these states, I'll show them what they are. Don't trust what you think because it's distorted. I go, yeah, fine. So anyway, then my job is to help them develop the witness. They can observe these states and reach for compassionate understanding. Evolution in humans, when you go a step farther, is characterized by deeper consciousness and more compassion. Now, when I discovered this, it blew my mind. It went, okay, so evolution has a directionality. It's towards unity. Deeper consciousness and more compassion is moving us towards unity. Evolution wants us to move towards unity. And when we're in a relationship, this very demanding, very powerful, and very fragile container of a modern relationship, we want to move in that direction in our friendship, our love affair, and our ability to solve problems. And if a wound happens or a rupture happens and we're disconnected and we enter one of these states, we don't want to do what we've been doing before. So what do we do instead? And so there's a series of things that people need to learn. They need to learn self-observation. So we cultivate the witness in all the different ways. They need to learn self-regulation, emotional regulation. People learn how to be aware of an emotion and regulate it. Awareness tends to regulate. They need to learn how they jack themselves up, that distorted perspective. When the defensive state starts, it's instantiated in 40 milliseconds. We're only able to be consciously aware of it a second later. We don't decide to go into anger or into fear. We discover ourselves in anger and fear. And not only do we discover ourselves in anger and fear, that story is there, negative story, that distorted perspective. And there's a self associated with that who wants to attack. If we can observe that and not indulge it, go, oh, here's Keith getting into one of his angry things or one of his fear things. There's a better way. If we can not indulge it and reach for a better way, now we're liberating ourselves. If I can do that with me while you're threatening me, first of all, we're not having a complimentary argument anymore. Because I'm not cooperating with the argument. I'm going, yeah, I get why you're mad at me, and what I just did, and okay. And I want us to be better. I can understand so now if I'm not doing it, I'm looking for have you feel understood and cared about by me. Once you're feeling understood and cared about by me, you're not going to stay in your defensive state, or you're less likely to. And now we're more available to that mutual understanding, step forward, shared warmth. And I encourage couples to have a sense of responsibility. We were talking in our last group. The group is when I started this group, it was called the Integrally Informed Psychotherapy Discussion Group. So Corey DeVos is in it, and John's in it, and Nomali Pereira is in it. A lot of great people. And of course, there's always a standing invitation for you, Roger, to join this group anytime that you want. Corey said, that's a terrible name. We're going to call it Soul Tank. So, I don't know, Soul Tank, fine. But it's obviously a better name than Integrally Informed Psychotherapy.
I actually like your name, but nobody asked me.
Okay, good. Well, I'm using both of them because, out of deference to.
I got an email referring to Soul Tank. I didn't know what you were talking about. So something happened. And can I say something, Keith? I feel like I'm trying to stop the Nile River here because you're in such a state of,
No, please.
Downloading for us. But one of the things I've thought about, and you're talking about pair bonding and the necessity of that and stable pair bonding. And in my work with people over the world, I've seen how traumatic it can be for children when that pair bonding splits or they don't get along well and they stay together. It really, really causes issues for the rest of their lives. And one of the really unique things about human beings is it takes such a long time for a newborn infant to mature to be an adult so that they can take care of themselves. I don't think there's any other species that takes it long. Other major mammals, 2 or 3 years, they have horse races for yearlings, horses that are like a year old, they're out there doing the horse thing. And why that is, and I think that's accountable for civilization. Why did we need civilization? Because you have to protect and feed and take care of the young. And I don't know why that is or why that happened, but that must have a huge impact on who we are as human beings, our psychology, and why we fall in love, and why it's good that we stay together, and all of these things, because it takes so long. I was given a talk one time and I said, basically, it takes about 30 years to become an adult. And an older woman in the front row said, try 40. And I was like, okay. So yeah, any insights or comments on that and how this applies?
You know, the mammals, the more social mammals, elephants, some of the whales, the great apes, have a neuron called the von Economo neuron, spindle-shaped neuron. It's a big one. It connects to frontal cortex with the limbic area, with the midbrain. And they're characterized by having longer and longer times of adolescence. And this is where social learning takes place. Now, social learning takes place with all mammals. All mammals, for instance, are capable of shame. You know, there's a sense of, I have a book on this called The Gift of Shame. A mammal, you know, the little wolf cubs are playing and they're doing something that the mother doesn't like, you know, that their disapproval causes them to have a little sympathetic collapse. And they learn social learning. So lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of social learning for humans. And since we're an ultra-social species, ultra-social is different than social. We're ultra-social like bees are social. We're like 90% chimpanzee and 10% bee. So think about if you had a beehive, but what if there was some of the bees in the beehive says, hey, why don't we make a square beehive? Why does it have to be round all the time? Okay. Or how come she gets to be queen? How about I get to be king, or you get to be king? And how about if, you know, we live on the ground instead of in the trees? How about we try that? I mean, humans are like, and then they create the way bees create. I mean, no other species does this. And part of that is this long period of social learning. Now, remember, at the core of that social learning is the family, is the hierarchies in the family. Are they dominator hierarchies? Are they growth hierarchies? And you're right about that sense of continuity that's super important, because anybody who gets into therapy who lost a parent, who had a divorce, within the first 15 minutes are going to tell you about that, because it was a signature injury for them and it affected them. Parenthetically, if you ever work with somebody who went to Harvard, they're going to let you know they went to Harvard in the first 15 minutes too. I think that's another social dynamic of some sort, but it's reliable. I mean, it always happens. So anyway, so that developmental arc is super important. Now, just like with any other multi-level development, every time you have a new capacity for going to another level, there's new capacities for pathology. And so there are certain signature psychopathologies that happen that can be inculcated in kids' nervous systems before they're born, the first year, the second year, the third year, the fifth year, the 10th year, all throughout our lives. Development never stops. We have critical periods, a bunch of them. A critical period is a time when the brain is wired to do a lot of neurogenesis, neural pruning, and create new capacities. And generally with humans, we don't develop a new capacity unless there's somebody who's modeling that capacity. It's called the model imperative. Joseph Chilton Pearce used to talk about this in his books. Now, one of the problems with that is if you grew up in an environment where you didn't have people that loved each other effectively, you're not having models of that. And you go through those developmental stages without those models, and it makes it harder to learn. Now, as humans, we have this infinite capacity for growth and development. We can learn them at any age. I mean, I guess I'm a grown-up at 74. I feel more grown-up than I ever did before, but would I say that, are you 100% grown-up? I don't think so. I mean, maybe I'll feel that way before I die. So as that stuff happens, we get better or worse at loving each other and get better or worse at dealing with the injuries that occur, the psychic injuries, the psychological injuries, the trauma programming. My belief, for instance, that resilience and programming and trauma programming are actually memory systems. And, there's a lot of data that supports that. So when we're dealing with trauma, we're dealing with a memory system where someone has been sensitized and they want to lose that sensitization and have it integrated. And if you're dealing with resilience programming, that's a memory system where there's some kind of issue that shows up or some problem shows up, and we confidently and in a relaxed way deal with it. And when you're doing trauma work, essentially what you do is find where people are sensitized, that system, and then you work with that system in the various different ways with the brainstem and with the people's memories and all that stuff, until eventually they move over and it becomes a resilience memory system. And there's stages that people go through with that. Just like there's stages with couples in how they bond with each other. And there's also stages that couples go through when they have wounds and they're come in hating each other or something, or pissed off or despairing. There's stages they go through and moving forward. And my job is to help them go as far as they want to go. It's a funny thing about being a therapist. I mean, at some point people go, okay, I've gone far enough. See you some other time. You go, okay, I'll be here. That works for me. I'm kind of a therapy monk. I live up here and do my practices and do my therapy and work out and occasionally go to conferences, but that's kind of all I do. Study, write. So somebody shows up 10 years later, it's like I saw him yesterday, and we'll move forward. It's a strange thing. People go as far as they want to go at a particular time, and part of being a therapist is respecting that, being fascinated with that. So that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah. And Keith, in terms of the question of how people move to a kind of relationship you're describing, as you called a post-issue relationship, which is, let's acknowledge, is pretty rare, unfortunately. Yes. I mean, it's one of the great tragedies of life that so few couples live their love as fully as they would both wish.
That's right.
And you're right. One reason is clearly there's a lack of modeling and there's a lack of skill that all of us have. We're educated to make a living, not to make a life. And your emphasis on the centrality of relationship at all levels, from the cutting edge of physics, which has moved towards more and more relational understanding at the most fundamental level of reality, up through mammalian species and humans, as you're talking about, relationship being so important, and the pair bond, intimate relationships being so important. But so back to this key question, how do people move in this direction, which, as you said, most people don't have models for, and don't really know what's possible. But if they come to someone like you and have a clue, or they're inspired by some other possibility or model, then what are the steps that people can make? And I'll just seed the conversation with one that is, I had the very good fortune of being in a beautiful long marriage with a very, very gifted therapist herself, Frances Vaughan. And one of the things I sure learned was that one of the most important things for a relationship, a growing relationship, was to have a shared, explicit commitment that the relationship was going. We're not only just going to try to love each other as well as we could, but we're also going to commit to using the relationship to learn and grow and help and heal each other. That seemed a crucial context. Is once you have that, then you have the permission to point to the other person, saying, "Hey, I think you're missing something," and to do it in a positive. There's an invitation for mutual feedback, which just seems somehow having that shared context of an agreement. Yes, we are committed to learning and growing together, and to help each other do so. That was so important. Love to hear your comments.
Well, first of all, do you feel like you and Frances got better at that throughout your relationship?
Yes, fortunately so. Yes, she was my coach in that.
Yeah, I've often said my wife Becky is my best teacher, and
Yeah.
and she is. Uh, so first of all, what you're describing is an intentional love, uh, an intentional friendship, an intentional love affair, an intentional desire to get better at healing injuries. Um, to me, the biggest shift is is a couple willing to intentionally pursue more love, better friendship, more love affair, better ability resolving issues. In our last integrally informed psychotherapy discussion group, I talked about a lot about integral sex therapy because that was the first thing I wrote about integral stuff. I was certified as a sex therapist in 77, and generally about 10-15% of my practice is working with sexual issues. And so I thought, God, integrally informed sex therapy is so great. I had this 70-page monograph I took to the conference, gave it to Bert Parley, who was very supportive. And it later became chapters in my book, Waking Up, on integrally informed, the textbook on integrally informed psychotherapy. And the point that I made about one of the points is that we teach people how to do math, or how to do gymnastics, or how to play a violin. Nobody teaches kids how to be sexual beings. They do in the Netherlands. They have great sex education there because they weren't hijacked by the Christian right in 1988. The Family Law Act. So a lot of people come in with inhibitions about all kinds of things. Now, the love affair is the most fragile one because people aren't given much education and they're not really given good models. But when people come into therapy, the first thing is, are you willing to be intentional about loving each other better? And are you willing to look at your own strengths and weaknesses in this area? Are you willing to do that? If two people are willing to do that and are willing to be different in different ways in interest of loving better, are you willing to be a little different, receive a little bit of influence in these areas and intentionally get better in your friendship, your love affair? Once people have made that decision, then there's a million things to do, but that's the most important point. That's it. That's the key. At that point, okay, sure, we can. Now I know the territory, and so I can guide you to that territory, and I'm happy to do it. Now, in the midst of it, it's a funny thing. There's a lot of schools of couples counseling, and I kind of observed them all with interest and studied all of them, of course. And basically, they all do the same thing, but from different angles. And somebody does a certain way of being with stuff, and it works, and they go, "Oh, that's the way to do couples counseling." Okay. Susan Johnson says, when you're working with a couple, you got to use real slow, soft voice and slow things down. Well, as you might have noticed from my personality here, that's not going to work for Keith. But it really works sometimes for some people. Okay, so all of it involves, all right, let's get to a place where, if you're willing to intentionally grow, where do you want to start? I always ask people when they come in, what do you want to work on today? And we'll work on improving that particular thing. Now, there's always steps. Self-awareness. Often we're crippled by psychological habits, often based in trauma. There's one guy that he had a horrible long marriage with a woman with borderline personality disorder, and he always felt horrible after having sex. Just horrible. It's just because it was a trauma history with him. And so when he started going out with, after he started working with me, he divorced her and started going out with more functional women with a lot of encouragement, and finally found a great woman. He had to learn that he had to go back and kind of find that part of him that felt wounded being sexual with this person who was basically a sadistic person, and recognize that now there's something different that happens with this other woman that I love and that loves me. And it's a different experience. And having that different experience and understanding with compassion what had happened before helped heal that until more and more he felt good, better after they made love. That was kind of a self as model thing. That was one way. That was for him. Some couples come in angry, quick to fight, quick to attack, quick to blame. You know, John Gottman's system, he calls them the four horsemen of the apocalypse. He has a wonderful system based on his research that basically saw the couples who were happy, some who were miserable, and he found all the characteristics of them, and he teaches the miserable couples to practice things that the happy couples do. That's his therapy. That works.
Yeah. And Keith, you mentioned Gottman, who is, as far as I'm aware, probably the main figure in couples work and research.
Oh, yeah.
And could you maybe give us an overview of what he finds to be the characteristics of healthy relationships and unhealthy ones?
Absolutely. First of all, I love John Gottman. I went to a workshop with him once, and at the very end, I said, you know, John, I've studied all these different systems, and your system has more great stuff and less bullshit than any of the others. And he smiled, and he smiled because he knew I was right. You know that.
Well, it's research based. I mean, it's very clearly, it's most couples systems are based on clinical observation, one person's observation, etc. And his is a really systematic approach to this whole field. And what's the research show? What are these ideas? And what's the data? What actually works?
And so on the most basic level, here's what John Gottman says. He said, if you want to know what a great relationship is, what a terrible relationship is, he says, imagine you have a salt shaker and the little grains of salt are actually yeses. He said, so a great relationship is there's lots of yeses. Yes, I understand that. Yes, let's do that. Yes, yes, yes. And the pepper shaker, there's no's. Okay, no, that's a bad idea. No, I'm not interested. No. Pepper shaker is the no's. He said, so the great relationships where you have less pepper shaker and more of the salt shaker, he said. Now, how you get there is difficult, but basically, that's what you're doing. And in his therapy, he does, and also he studied physiological arousal in his work, which is really interesting. He actually have people wear monitors because he discovered in his work that once people have a stress pulse of about 100 or above, that's called diffuse physiological arousal, they can't think. And so people talking at that point are not thinking. You know, that's their one brainstem, you know, hammering with another brainstem. And, you know, the cerebral cortex is, you know, out to lunch at that particular point. And so he teaches people when you get kind of when you start approaching that 100 thing, just stop for a while. And he did a study on this that I find beautiful. He had people stop for a while and go off. One group went and journaled about, you know, this is my part of this problem. Another group went off and, you know, like, and meditated. Another group went off and read a magazine and then came back to the conflict discussion. And the group that did best was the group that went off and read a magazine and came back to the conflict discussion. Now, the reason why I found that, in my opinion, and, you know, you always got to be cautious interpreting somebody else's results, but okay, I have no problem, you know, doing it, is that when you enter that reciprocating negative states, the selves in those states don't like each other very much and don't particularly care about hurting the other person. So you go off and you read a magazine for a while and you calm down, and now your pulse is back to around 65, 70. And you enter a state where, God, she's kind of a nice person. He's kind of a nice person. And you come back and you go back to whatever the issue was, and you have a little bit more access to it. So one of the things that he suggests is monitor your physiological arousal. Also, a couple of things that don't do. Don't nurture resentments. Don't make negative comparisons. Couples that do that enter what he thinks is a 23-step state. Now, he's a little obsessive compulsive, I think.
Give us an example of a negative comparison. What would that be?
Yeah, Sally next door works out all the time. She's got a great body, but you don't work out enough. You used to look a lot better. Okay. Now, that goes over really well. that really motivates her to go work out and feel beautiful, doesn't it? That's a negative comparison. So there's 23 steps where the 23rd step, somebody's cheating on somebody. That's how it happens. He says it doesn't just happen right away. It's a cascading effect. But couples that cherish each other, and feel lucky, feel grateful for each other, those couples do well.
Yeah.
And so he encourages, and now, he has this thing, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: defensiveness, contempt, stonewalling, and criticism. Don't do that. Well, of course. Okay. Now, everybody, when they're not in a defensive state, says, sure. But,
Keith, let me ask you a question. I was in a lecture one time with a couples therapist, and he said he could tell basically within the first few minutes whether there was any hope of this couple staying together. And then I think he talked about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse or something like that. Is that something that's true in your experience? You can just see something, this is not fixable. This is just, way beyond the point of return.
That's a really good question, because, in a way, I don't want to know. I've kind of resisted that. Why? Because if people want to work on it, then I'll go, okay, there's a possibility. Now, I'll tell people is percentages. There's maybe a 30% chance you guys can get to a place that you both like, or maybe a 60 or 70% chance, depending upon what happens. Every once in a while, people come in, I get kind of a sick feeling in my stomach. Probably 7 or 8 out of maybe 7 out of 10 times that couple ends up separating. They go, we want to work on it. I go, okay, and I'll help them work on it. But that particular feeling generally has been diagnostic. It's too bad. You see that it's obvious with things like addiction and abuse, but it's less obvious in other relationships. There's a certain mystical connection with couples. It has to work or doesn't work sometimes. Doesn't lend itself to rational analysis or even observation. There's a certain magic. For instance, couples go through stages, right? There's attraction, and then there's romantic infatuation, where 11 hormone systems all collaborate to be fascinated and turn on to each other. And then there's intimate bonding, where people begin to have feel more like family of origin, feel less sexually urgent, and some of their more basic defenses come out. That's generally when people start having problems. Tom Habib has his 5 relational stages. He calls that the relational stage, where they have to work on that stuff. That's where people need to get intentional. So yeah, sometimes I get that sense. I never know for sure. Some couples I thought would break up, they stay together. They keep working on stuff. John Gottman found that high conflict couples, if they turned to each other when the other person wanted attention, if they consistently did that, they tended to stay together. Okay, that they had a lot of conflict, but also they had a lot of contact. And I have occasionally seen that with couples. So that's my experience with that kind of now. And there's just general diagnostic stuff. 15 to 19% of the population has a personality disorder. Now, personality disorder is characterized by somebody making the same mistake over and over again, making lots of problems and not noticing it, not being able to see it. If one of the people has a personality disorder, that increases the difficulty of the work by an order of magnitude. Because now you got to help them with their personality disorder while you're helping the relationship, and you got to help their partner deal with somebody with the personality disorder. The most common ones that people know the most about are psychopathic and narcissistic and borderline, but there's actually 10 of them. And that again makes things more difficult. Not impossible, but more difficult.
Ethan, earlier you were talking about as an extension of John Gottman's work, the idea of what couples can do when conflicts arise. And it seems like And certainly it was my experience in my marriage, it was really important to have a go-to process, an agreement on, okay, if we get triggered, let's do X.
Well, here I am, John Dupuy again, and I'm here to talk about supporting the Deep Transformation podcast. The podcast has been an amazing experience for Roger and myself and for our team, and it's been growing. We're currently in the top 2% of worldwide podcasts, which is really remarkable. We think it's very important. We think deep transformation is the only way to go, because if we don't, we're in serious trouble. And we're so grateful for the amazing presences and spirit and soul and people who've been on our podcast. We'd also like to ask you again for your support, financial support, and thank you for all of you who have been supporting this. And up till now, it's all been out of pocket for Roger and myself. And it takes money to produce, to pay our staff, and for marketing. And so the circle keeps on growing, but the quicker that could happen, the more positive effect we could have in the world. And that's what we're here to do. And I was thinking before this, upstairs in my meditation room, I have the famous 10 Zen ox herding pictures up there. And the final one, after you guys go through all this journey, is going back into the marketplace with open hands and open heart. And so that's what we're trying: open hands, open heart, open mind, so that we can do what? We can transform effectively and deeply and listen to some of the greatest minds on our planet as to how to do that. So thank you for your support. We love you and you matter. God bless.
And certainly it was my experience in my marriage, it was really important to have a go-to process, an agreement on, okay, if we get triggered, let's do X. And it can be a series of things, and you know, each couple I think finds their own. But it seemed like that was a very important thing to do whenever there was reactivity. Okay, let's take a breath, and for us it was a line from the Course in Miracles, which we both worked, which was interestingly was a very valuable thing to work with, because of all the spiritual paths. It's the only one we found anywhere in the world that's centered on relationship as the primary focus for awakening. So just having a line from there, okay, whenever anger arises, remember how much you owe your brother or sister and how much they have given you, and now you have an opportunity to give something back, by stopping, by being loving instead of you so and so. So having some, you were basically outlining. You just didn't say the words. So I want to say the words of the importance of having an agreed on emergency technique. I'd love to hear you comment on that.
Well, first of all, I love Course in Miracles for exactly that reason, because it really honored the relational nature of humanity, and it just came out of nowhere. It was channeled to this person who wasn't particularly happy about having to do it, but they kind of surrendered to it. So couples, yes. Now I'll offer people a wide variety of things to do depending upon their capacity. When you're in a defensive state, it's hard to remember anything. And the defensive state wants to attack or flee. The stories it gives you are stories that justify attacking or fleeing. And so the devil's in the details around. You learn a process. The process that you were describing is a great one. Okay. What do I want? So you're mad at your spouse. Well, what do I want? I want to love her. I don't want to be mad at her. Okay. How do I do that? Okay. Attacking her is a bad idea. If I'm actually thinking about it, that's not going to work. Okay. Okay. If I love her, then if I want to stop being mad and love her, maybe if I focus on understanding the legitimacy of whatever's upsetting her, maybe I can get back to love with her and let her and have her feel understood by me. Usually she becomes the person I like. If I can remember that works great. Now, what I've discovered is that people find it fiendishly difficult to remember stuff like that when they're upset. Defensive states, remember, have hijacked. I relate to our entire adaptive unconscious. This is what I call shadow. I wrote about it in my book, Shadow Light. A little bit of a difference of opinion with my friend Ken Wilber. It's the only argument he and I ever had, I think, but so I value it. It's just one of my favorite arguments. I think the whole adaptive unconscious is our shadow self that's always given us guidance in the form of states. And that guidance is either constructive guidance, where we're socially engaged and, going through the world, loving our partner and being loved by her or him, or destructive shadow, where we feel threatened and we're going into these primitive places. Now, this stuff just is always coming up. And now, if we can learn to distinguish between the constructive stuff and say yes to it, and the destructive stuff and say, I need to dialysize you. I'm mad at you. I want to tell you why you're all wrong. And I don't think that's a good idea. I'm going to tell you something else instead. I'm not, what I'm doing with that, the defensive state is there. That destructive shadow is there to try to help me. It's trying to help me get back to love. It's just doing it in the way that it worked 40,000 years ago in a tribe, because they didn't have more sophisticated techniques. Okay. Never mind, the consciousness. They didn't have the language for stuff like this. So, but if that can happen and I can say, so I'll focus on understanding you. Okay. That works really well sometimes. Sometimes let's take a break and come back when we're feeling good, when we're feeling better about each other. That works sometimes. Sometimes it works. There's one couple I work with where the woman has a difficulty entering defensive states where she's just locked into a negative belief about him. And when she came from somewhat of an abusive environment where that capacity to block somebody out with that negative belief served her. That was a survival strategy. It was a winning strategy around these people that were just trying to tell her she was horrible. Nope, I'm in my belief. You can't reach me. Okay, so she enters that belief and he tries to reach her. And whatever he does feels like abuse to her. Okay. So, and he gets more pissed and finally starts being mean. So one part of my job is in a relaxed point to have, so, when you're locked away, nothing's going to get through until you invite it. So I taught him how to say, is there anything I can do right now to help you feel better? Rather than argue with her and try to burst through that barrier. Anything I can do to help you feel better right now? And she discovered that, no. I said, well, when that's happening, hey, go take a shower, go take a walk, go play with the dog, talk about it later. So, of course, in the session, they said, sure, we'll do that. It came back a week later. Did they do that? Of course not. They spent a couple hours doing the same damn thing, and he did, but by the third or fourth time we hit this, he was going, anything I can do to help you feel better? And she was going, she came in, God, this made me so happy. She came in, yeah, we had an episode, but she said it only lasted 10 minutes. I went, what did you do to only make it last 10 minutes? Come on, how did you do that? And she told me she had a little bit of awareness. She goes, okay, I need to calm down and then create loving contact with him. And she did. And he needed to forgive her for that 10 minutes of vitriol and then go, okay, we're back. So that was huge progress with that couple. And so that's what worked for them. But because of that particular constellation of defenses, they needed a particular formula. And this is how it works with couples. Carl Jung said, I come up with a new psychology for every patient. And I really believe that. It's one of the reasons I've never taken one of my books and go, okay, now Keith's all about the gift of shame or the attuned family or the shadow light or Loving Completely, my book on relationships. I love all those books, but they're just facets of a larger system. And, I'm not going to live or die on those books. I mean, there's differences, there's exceptions. I've learned a lot more about that stuff since I wrote those books. I mean, they're good systems, but all the systems are good systems. What you ask yourself is, who is this person and who is this couple? And what do they need at this moment? And and then you open up a channel to the other world and let it come through the session. And I'm kind of surprised sometimes what happens. Some system comes through. So, in one session, I'll be doing brain spotting with another person. Another person, I'm telling them about John Gottman. And then another person, and then another session, we're doing trauma work. Okay. just, I kind of stay out of the way and let my unconscious do all that stuff.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think you're giving voice to one of the key aspects of what makes both a good therapist and a good skilled relationship person is flexibility and appropriateness.
Yes.
And Mencius, the great Confucian sage, defined wisdom as appropriateness for each moment. And there's a beautiful story, Zen koan. What is it that Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are doing in each moment? And the answer is responding appropriately. I think you're just pointing to something so important. There's a beautiful line you quoted Jung. Jung had another beautiful line of learn your theories as well as possible, but put them aside when you come in contact with a living soul. And it's like, yes, and you're describing that so beautifully.
That sounds like what Bruce Lee said about martial arts. Do your katas, do your forms, everything, but when you get in the moment, just forget all that and be like water, react. Just go with it. And
it's funny you say that, because my association, and I'm a martial artist. My favorite teacher in martial arts is Miyamoto Musashi, who wrote a book of 5 rings in 1645, which is my Bible, really, one of my Bibles, one of my sacred texts. And he said, learn the 5 sword attitudes. He said, learn all these, and then forget the 5 sword attitudes and just think about cutting your opponent. It's like that in therapy. You learn all that stuff and then forget about all that stuff and just think about helping the person. This brings us to another thing. The way we're talking about this, the 3 of us, this form of discourse where people are kind of interested in each other and looking for how we fit together. I think that this form of discourse is a metapsychology. I think this is a 21st century metapsychology, because this kind of dialogue, we're looking for how things fit together, and we're interested in new ideas. And I think that's what characterizes a metapsychology in the 21st century. I don't think there's any one system or one approach or one series of principles. I think all of them are appropriate and certain or useful. But when this kind of dialogue, when this kind of dialectic, this kind of discourse is happening, this is, I think, the cutting edge of psychology and psychotherapy in the 21st century. And it's one of the things I talk about in our group, integrally informed psychotherapy discussion group. And I'm become more and more convinced that form of discourse is a big deal. And one of the reasons that I mention it is because it feels so good. Roger was talking about, hey, we're going to have a good time. We're feeling a certain kind of joy. I've been looking forward to this ever since we did it, for like a month ago. I can't wait. Well, that joy is a demand characteristic of this form of discourse. And so if I stop feeling this joy, I go, wait a minute, what's going on, Keith? And so would you. And we would make an adjustment to get back into that vibe. Okay. Now, this is very different from 20th century psychologists that didn't pay a lot of attention to emotive discourse as a primary, necessary, not necessary ingredient to the evolution of the field. And I think it is. And I invite any therapist or coach or teacher or anybody that's listening to this, I invite you, when you have that dialectic with an informed person about, interest, the human experience, you're engaging in a 21st century metapsychology. And I encourage you to do that dialectic every chance you get and really trust the truths and the insights and the techniques that come out of that, and then share them with other people.
Yeah.
Keith, you're pointing to a kind of developmental process that occurs in which one becomes, as one does, say, one's whatever practice one does, whether it's in being in psychotherapy or meditation or yoga or martial arts, one develops increased sensitivity, and you become increasingly sensitive to when you're off in some way, when you're caught in something, when you're trapped, etc. But you're also implying something which seems very important, that one also becomes increasingly sensitive to when a relationship is off. And one
Yes.
there's a capacity for catching things earlier and earlier. Say more about that.
Well, you know, this is why I've always loved your stuff. With the first time I heard you talk to Roger, it was about karma yoga from the Bhagavad Gita. And I read the Bhagavad Gita in college, and the karma yoga part of it, I went, okay, make everything that I do, including every relationship, be an expression of God. That works really, really well. And when you talk, and you wrote an article on wisdom that I really liked. Okay, it was obvious to me that there was for you that there was a sense of loving connection that needed to happen from your heart with the world, and by implication other people. And you just seem stable in that. You still, to this day, you seem stable in that. And I think that in relationship, yes, you feel when there's something off, and you go, okay, what do I want to do? I want to get back on. If now another way of seeing this is, if there's a little disruption in my love, my responsibility is to heal it, because the friendship, the love affair, is always there. The most active couple that has sex 1 or 2% of their waking hours, but the love affair is there 100% of the time, waking and sleeping, because we're dreaming. And I have a responsibility to have that work with my partner. And if it's not, then it's my job to fix it. And then it's her job to participate in that and do the same thing. And when both of us take that on, something changes about that relationship. A lot of people complain about modern marriage. Esther Perel is really big on this, mating in captivity. We used to, never have sex, and then we get married and we're able to have sex. And now when we get married, we can't have sex with anybody else, and blah, blah, blah about how marriage is boring and everything, and you need to have adventure. And I'm sorry I said blah, 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 because I love Esther Perel and I love her system, and I've studied it, and, I'd love to talk to her about it someday. Yes, yeah, all that stuff is true. And when you're aware of that energetic connection, and when you feel the disruption, you go, oh, let's make it better. And my partner goes, yeah, I want to help do that. You're liberated by that. That relationship is a liberation hierarchy. I feel liberated by my marriage. I don't feel constrained by it. Like you were saying, Francis was one of your best teachers. Well, Becky is one of my best teachers. The experience of that is indescribable, really. But I know it's really good. I know, when I'm with a couple, I'm always imagining them there. Not Keith and Becky, but them there. And that's where I'm guiding them. I always have this vision of them there. And that's not happening, of course, but when it happens and you feel it, it's a liberation. And it's a tantric practice in that sense, because tantric is we're experiencing unity together. Okay, that's a tantric practice. And so there it is. And it's a good way, it's a good directionality, it's a compass for all change work. And it's like that. You feel the disruption and you have a responsibility to get it back to love.
Keith, when I was in school studying to be a transpersonal therapist, we learned everything that everybody else learned, as far as techniques and different schools and all of that, psychology. And one of the questions, well, what does it mean to be a transpersonal therapist? And the response normally was, it's how you hold the people you're working with. And I'd like to hear your experience and comment on that. And I also think that perhaps with Deep Transformation, the podcast, One of the reasons that people like it is because we hold the people in a certain space, or we listen deeply, or they feel like we're really there with them. So how do you feel about that?
Well, one way of saying transpersonal is you don't take things personally. Okay.
Wonderful.
All right.
Never
So
heard of that in all the years I've been around the field.
you don't take things personally. So when somebody comes in, a couple, an individual, a family, a group even, I'm married to them during that hour or 2 hours. There really is no difference in my commitment during that time than my commitment to my wife. I mean, and whatever's going on, okay, my job is to help them grow, period. And I have human reactions, if somebody gets mad or is different or that kind of stuff. But those are kind of part of the instrument board that Keith is using. So that position of we're going back to integral now. Felt appreciation from multiple points of view, diminished fear, a very clear purpose. Psychotherapy is very, very, for the therapist, there's a very, very focused, clarified intent. My job is to help the best that I can. And if it's not working, to change velocities, change direction at high velocities. Some new comes up, okay. Now, Carl Rogers, another beautiful guy, he reminds me of Roger, Carl Rogers.
Wow, that's high praise. Thank you, Keith.
Go watch the guy do a session. You'll see what I mean. What he did is he saw that the best therapist really listened from this centered place of love and acceptance. And all the other stuff they did was secondary to that. And the research has supported that, by the way. Outcome research in psychotherapy said, they look at positive change. They go, what characterizes the variance of positive change in psychotherapy? Well, 30% of it is the relationship. Now, 40% of it is client variables. Do they have friends? Do they, do they have resources? 15% is method of treatment. 15% is placebo. You come to somebody, give them a lot of money, you expect to get better. Okay. But the biggest one besides client variables is that relationship. And he saw that. And I did a lot of training programs in the 70s. I worked half-time training paraprofessionals and therapists around in some counseling centers. I started with a guy. And then when I went into private practice, he went on and did Pacific guidance in Santa Barbara, Steve Eyes and stuff. And I used Rogers' model as systematized by Robert Karkoff, who took Rogers' stuff and did a lot of research on it and came up with the 7 core qualities of Rogers' stuff. And that was a really great way to teach people to begin to be therapists. And I enjoyed it. And that training model endured. There are some people say, hey, look, can we use your training model? And I said, sure, fine. Some people did it for like 15, 20 years after that. I don't know what's happened to it since then. But it's like that sense. So going back to your question about a transpersonal therapist, you're not taking things personally. It's really not about you. I don't really feel, I feel like there's something else coming through me in therapy, really. And I like Keith. I really like who I am in therapy. He's a really good guy, not much ego. When he gets narcissistic, he catches it and is amused by it. It's pretty great. My personal development has always been behind my professional development. And one of the ways I got this is one of the times Becky and I were having a fight. This is like 40 years ago, right? Literally 40 years ago, 40. And the phone rang. Client had a crisis. I dealt with it. Peggy said, why can't you be like that with me? And I thought to myself, she's so right. Why can't I? And that became kind of a focus of my work, my personal work for the years following that. And right on. Ultimately, as we move through the world, like we have a responsibility to be our best self, our wise self. When do I not have that responsibility? Okay, I can't think of a time. I'm either a value-added or a value-subtracted person. I want to be a value-added person. Now, I'm never going to always be my best self, just like I'm never going to not have any issues in a relationship. But there's a directionality, a place to grow towards. And if I have acceptance of my own imperfection, I don't get all any type 1 on, I'm an any type 6, but the perfectionist. If you don't get all hung up on perfection, you just go, I want to keep on growth mindsetting myself, getting better at this. That's a good way to grow as an individual. And that's a necessary way to grow as a psychotherapist. This is necessary. It's not sufficient, but sometimes, but it's necessary.
What exactly is necessary to be a psychotherapist? What are you saying?
It's necessary to be able to love somebody in a particular way, in a particular clean way of understanding them, changing perspectives as their perspective change, and be fully committed to their development and to protect them from your ego and to protect them. That's why in the code of ethics says no dual relationships. That was designed to help therapists stay in that particular lane. That position of acceptance, understanding, openness to change, openness to different things, that's necessary. And that creates, and deep understanding tends to create a loving bond with your client. And at the core of my work, love heals. That is basically, if there's one statement that characterizes all my psychotherapy, love heals.
Beautiful. Keith, it seems as there are many, obviously, other ways in which individuals and couples can grow, but it seems that one of the most important and one of the most tricky and most misunderstood is the absolute crucial importance of truth-telling. That a relationship can come to new levels when there is a commitment to telling the truth skillfully. And most people think of telling the truth as saying the worst possible thing you can say to the other person, but to say what is true, as the Buddha said it, is, I know no more succinct advice than the Buddha's: say what is true and helpful. And so to be in relationship and to make a commitment to say what is true and helpful, and to move through gradually and relationally the barriers to being honest and open, and to move past withholding, etc., but to do it in a way which comes out of love and for the well-being of both people. That seems such a crucial practice, and it really is a practice. Love to hear your comments.
Well, first of all, you noticed in the Eightfold Path, right view, right conduct, right speech, right resolve, right effort, right mindfulness. Now, all of these are relational. All these are speaking to this. From a standard of the language you've been using in so far, being honest with your distorted perspective is an act of emotional violence. Okay, I'm just saying it like it is. Yeah, you're saying like it is in your distorted perspective and your destructive impulse to attack this person, and so you feel justified in engaging in emotional violence to them. Does that help anything? No, it doesn't. Okay. So what I let people know is one, yeah, be honest, but don't trust a belief where you don't have compassionate understanding. If you don't have compassionate understanding, get compassionate understanding and then speak from that. The word justified, this came up. I was working with this guy, and so So his wife has a bad habit. You know, she has difficulty learning certain things. He says, well, I feel justified in using that tone. I said, oh, justified. Yeah. So let me see. So it feels moral for you to attack her when she does that, right? That's, you got uncomfortable. You go, wait a minute, you know, like I moral, yeah, well, justified. That's moral, right? You know, and so that's that. We know we went into that. Okay, so he got it. I don't have compassion and understanding. So you know, then don't do it. By the way, this is a whole big deal. Jonathan Haidt did this research on and you can read about it in The Righteous Mind, a fantastic book. Okay? We're born with 6 moral foundations embedded. I mean, this comes from our evolutionary past. You know, every human has it. I mean, you know, if you can, you know, psychopaths have limbic damage, but, you know, basically everybody else. And these 6 foundations guide us. And so they get corrupted by defensive states. You know, for instance, one of them is fairness, one of them is care. You know, care and harm, fairness and unfairness, and so on. And someone go, well, it's a caring thing to tell my kid that, you know, that he's not trying hard enough. That's how I care for them. I go, oh, okay. So you're trying to help your kid try harder. Yes. So you feel like it's moral for you to use that dismissive tone with him, that contemptuous tone, because you believe that motivates him. You know, at that particular point, modern people begin to get a little uncomfortable with it's moral to use a contemptuous tone. Back when I was in high school, by the way, sure, my wrestling coach, you know, my karate instructors. I remember one guy literally, he didn't hear the instructions and literally knocked me out. You know, we were doing a sparring exercise. The instructor came and said contemptuously, don't fall down so easily, you know. And of course, I apologized for falling down so easily. I mean, you know, this is how it was in those days. I mean, modern people get a little uncomfortable when they feel like, oh, I guess I'm morally justified to use a hostile tone, or I use a contemptuous tone or dismissive. You go, yeah, I guess that's not. Yeah. If you can, whatever you say, you can say it in a compassionate, in a kind way. Kindness matters. Compassion and understanding matters. So yes, find compassion and understanding, and then be transparent, be honest. You know, this is a difference I have clinically. I don't have many. But Esther Perel says she'll have individual sessions with people and she'll keep secrets from one person or the other. I tell couples, I'm not going to do that. If we have an individual session, don't tell me anything that's a big secret from your partner. I don't want to have that because that feels dishonest to me. And so I think transparency, a subjective sense of we don't hide anything from each other. That's not the same as telling each other everything, but we don't hide things from each other. Or if I don't tell you something, and then later on you found out I didn't tell you, and I tell you this is why I didn't tell you, that you'll go, oh yeah, I understand why you didn't tell me. That's the standard. If you don't tell your husband something, when you tell him later why you didn't tell him, and will he say, yeah, that was a good idea? You know, sometimes that's a good idea. I don't know. If you think to yourself, that's an ugly dress, might not be a good idea to say that. I mean, okay, I mean, I guess that's not honest, but I mean, so what? So honesty is a relative term. Transparency is a relative term. The standard is what serves love. And also, if we have a disagreement about it, let's work it out. And then we get more refined in the way that we're honest with each other.
Yeah, the standard is what serves love. That's a beautiful line, Keith.
Yeah, that's the standard.
Yeah. And yet there is a possibility of moving to a place, and you know, as I said, I was married to an extremely skilled therapist and relational human being, and it was possible to move to a place, and I've also experienced this in some work groups of, you know, really working intensely on deep group work, of reaching a place where you know there's no thought you have that you can't share with this human being. And when you reach that stage, it's just a whole different kind of relationship. There's
Pretty
no
great.
hiding the barriers, the sense of separation, lessened, and you realize that so much of the sense of separation is a construction around things that I'm not willing to share. And when that goes, it's a whole different level of relationship.
You're describing radical acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And commitment. So radical acceptance is a good thing to practice all the time, because why not? But with two people having radical acceptance and a commitment to love, to growth and love, when that happens, then again, there's something indescribably delicious about that. And it's not easy because of all this destructive shadow stuff that comes from our unconscious regularly, because we move through the world feeling either secure or not secure, challenged or not challenged. And so that creates confusion, that creates problems. And then with that comes, can I observe those? Can I correct those? Can I trust? When you have radical acceptance with a partner, you trust each other with everything, which is what you're describing. And then an interesting thing happens. You kind of become interested. Becky and I once were walking to the beach, hot summer day. Okay, so we're walking to the parking lot, and four young women were walking back. Three of them, covered up at the beach, and one of them was just wearing her bikini. This beautiful young woman. It was like a searchlight coming through the parking lot, and appropriately, you should only look at somebody like that for about a second and then stop. Okay, it was at least 3 seconds for me, and then I kind of looked guiltily at my wife, and she looked at me with great sympathy. She says, "Yeah, I completely understand." Okay, she had radical acceptance. Keith's attention was captured. He gave 2 seconds of inappropriate leering, because he couldn't help himself. And she just, found it funny that happened. She wasn't offended by it. It was like, God, that's what I mean by liberating. So, okay. And it was a mistake. I shouldn't have done the extra 2 seconds. And she did notice it, which I appreciated, but it wasn't a wound with us. Okay. It was just something that was kind of a source of humor with us.
Keith, can I bring up a subject? I worked with counseling online and living in my home for years, alcoholics and addicts, and it's also a therapeutic wilderness guide. And I found after a certain point in the relationship that if they knew for sure that I really cared about them and I loved them, okay, and there was a deep caring and respect there in that relationship. At that point, sometimes I could be very forceful and even ruthless because I loved them and I saw this thing that was killing them, which was their addiction. And it's almost like you're dealing with an exorcism. The addict self is so distorted and so twisted and so evil and just wants to kill the person. That's its main goal. And I also found when I was in the Army, when I was in basic training, and then we had MP school tapped onto that the drill sergeants were just pretty brutal. It's called the Brown Boot Army. They were just, they'd take you behind the barrack and, teach you. Yeah. But by the end of it, we would have followed them into hell because we knew that it was all, they're wanting to make us soldiers. They're wanting to save our lives, to make us tough, to keep it, from being a soft civilian into a tough soldier that could do his duty or her duty and survive combat. And do you find that in your practice that sometimes you have to intervene in a forceful way? And it's easier, I think, when you're living with people 24/7 than maybe, the allotted time that you have in a therapist office. But have you found that in your experience?
Yeah. My son was a wilderness guide, one of the guides in a wilderness school for 18 months in Maine. He used to call me at night, essentially for supervision. That, by the way, that 18 months was enough to tell him he never wanted to be a therapist. He ended up being a doctor. Much better for his psychology. First of all, yes, addiction's a good example because I've had the same experience. Of course, anybody who's in this business has worked with addiction. And so I'll tell people, you're committing slow suicide. You're going to die. One study said 70% of alcoholics die between the ages of 45 and 55 of an alcohol-related illness. So that's going to happen to you. And I don't want it to happen to you. And along the way, a lot of horrible things happen, as you know. Or, so if you can see something like that coming, you tell them, I think that's coming. And what are you willing to do about it? You know, people, addicts who don't want to do anything about it will drop out of treatment with me after 2 or 3 sessions. It's like, it's just not, you know, why should they come and have the session and have me say, no, we're not going to, I don't want to work on your relationship. You're a practicing alcoholic. You know, working on your relationship with when you're a practicing alcoholic doesn't make any sense. You got to address your alcoholism. Addiction comes first.
Yeah.
And no, I don't want to work on my drinking. I want to work on whatever. Sorry. Now, the people who stay, they'll start going, okay, let's see. And, you know the steps. People always go, well, I can drink in a controlled fashion. Sure, says Keith. So, you know, keep it to like, I don't know, 3 drinks a night for the next 6 months. Okay, I can do that. Next week. So how did you do? Well, pretty good.
Yeah, try some controlled drinking. See how that goes.
Yeah. So they tried controlled drinking and they failed that 2 or 3 times. So the 3rd time they fail it, I'll give you as much rope as you need. And I'll go, hey, you're an alcoholic, as far as I can see. So rather than go do a failed controlled drinking experiment, let's talk about whether you're going to kill yourself with alcohol or whether you're going to get in recovery. And I frankly have never known anybody to get in recovery just with therapy. I mean, you need something else. And, you know, something. AA is wonderful. But, you know, some people don't do something else. But, you know, now, in addition to AA or other things, then sure, therapy can really help. And I'll tell people that. I go, and so we take the steps. You know how long it takes sometimes. I mean, there's one guy, he said he was going to do controlled drinking, work on his relationship, and eventually she left him. But he got in recovery, and then he gave me a call. He says, you know, you were right. I'm in recovery now, and, you know, and we're back together. Wow. You know, I know. I don't get, you know, when I get a call like that, it kind of makes my day. I go, okay, it's pretty great.
Yeah, as a general rule, they have to stop using the desired substance before therapy can work. You know, a practicing alcoholic is very hard to work with as a client.
Yeah, well, the therapy is all about that. I mean, that's what I mean. You know, if they're not willing to do that, then they don't come back. But, you know, if they come back, I'll have the same session. I'll do it 3 times. It's okay with me. You take as long as you want. You said this last time. Yeah, you're an alcoholic. You're dying of alcoholism. And you keep wanting to talk about something else. So I'm sorry. You know, your problem is, you know, and if they stay, then we'll start the series of steps that often lead to recovery, which, by the way, there's something about recovery that is so beautiful because very rarely do you see people have a sudden shift. Now, if you have a personality disorder, it doesn't work quite so well. But say you don't have a personality disorder. It's like someone who gets, you know, like somebody in prison who gets Jesus and now I can't kill anybody anymore or whatever. Somebody gets in recovery. It's like, yeah, now I'm in recovery. That's when I was drinking. And now they can love, you know, someone comes to me and they goes, yeah, I've been sober in the program for 5 years or 10 years. And I feel admiration. And most people feel admiration for somebody who says that.
Absolutely. Okay.
What they don't do is they don't say to themselves, Jesus. So before 5 years ago, you were just raising havoc with everybody and causing all kinds of problems and killing yourself with alcohol and ruining your family. You don't think that. You think, oh, you've been in recovery for 5 years. You've been in recovery for 10 years. That's beautiful. So there's something so cool about getting into recovery. I mean, it's just one of those flexion points you don't get very much around.
And part of the work at 12 Steps, of course, is cleaning up your messes that you made while you were using as far as possible. That's a big part of it. Like you're saying, it's not, oh, I'm sober now and blah, blah, blah. Well, there's just destruction and pain and betrayal and all kinds of stuff that you left in your wake. So now you have to go back as part of that path to clean up your messes.
Well, it's interesting that the 8th and 9th steps, which is, making amends steps, happen after you do the first 7 steps. I mean, you have to surrender to something larger. You have to do a fearless inventory. You have to ask authentically from your heart to be relieved of this bullshit. You need to go through those spiritual steps. It's a spiritual program before you can authentically make amends. That's going back to what Roger said, about John Gottman. Sometimes you get things through science, and sometimes you just have some kind of, like this Course in Miracles or the 12 Steps. Somebody's just divinely inspired, and some system is just delivered into the world. And here we are all these years later, and that system is still working great. Those 12 steps, 12 and 12, God, I love AA. Jeez.
Yeah, I used to tell my students that 12 steps is something everyone should work through.
Right.
But you get lucky enough to be in a situation where you almost have to, you're not going to survive. So it's humanity 101. This is like how you do the game.
It's a lot like, I think of like a veterans group. A lot of people in a veterans group, they've all been in the war. They've all experienced the horror of war. They've all experienced that sickening, the worst thing that people can do, that humans can do, the war. Well, in AA, everybody's had this, I chose life over addiction. We're all survivors of that. They're all veterans of that. I think it really, you go to an AA group and they're united in that deep experience. And again, that adds spiritual power. I mean, there's power in those groups. I encourage my clients to do it when they do, they're glad they did most of the time.
Beautiful. Keith, we've covered so much. As we come towards the end here, is there anything else you'd like to add in?
When I was before everything that I do something like this, I go, okay, so what's my purpose? What's your purpose, Keith? What are you? I mean, part of it was just to have fun with you guys. I mean, so mission accomplished.
Right.
That's happened. The other one was 2 things. One, I really wanted people to know that those post-issue moments are our human birthright. That, that God has given us these capacities. And if we keep developing, we can have this experience with other people, and we can have the interior experience of harmony that someone has when they're feeling that sense of radical acceptance of self as well as others, in integration of self. I wanted people to know that exists and to reach for it, because if you reach for it, good things happen. So that was one purpose. The other purpose was I wanted people to realize how extraordinary these kinds of conversations are, like we're having. That this mode, I hear it on podcasts. I have it on my own podcasts. That when informed people are together, engaged in the dialectic, looking for deeper truths with each other, and we're in this looking for deeper truths about the human experience. We're enacting a metapsychology. We're at that cutting edge. And I wanted to invite everybody, as I said earlier, all the therapists and all the coaches and all the change people and teachers, have these dialectics. If you're feeling the joy, if you have the purpose of expansion and understanding, if you're open to influence, you're enacting a 21st century metapsychology and you're contributing to all of us. And I wanted to invite everybody to do that. So those are my two purposes for today.
Yeah.
Well, mission accomplished.
Yeah. Keith, let me hold up the mirror. When you're speaking, and as this conversation went on, I mean, obviously you're really smart and you've had tons of experience, clinical experience with people, but there's a quality of wisdom, and I know you recognize that from the inside, when you're on with your clients, when you're teaching that moment, when you're sparring, or when, whatever it is that you do, there's this higher power that is more than just the combination of your experience and all your head knowledge that comes through, that brings it together, that makes it extremely powerful. And I think Roger's written a lot about wisdom and thought a lot about wisdom, and I really experienced that from you when you get into that place. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I believe that the three of us are connected to the other world. That's what I call, the other stuff. I feel like we're connected to the other world. I think that's part of the joy that we feel in this kind of discourse, or in this kind of service. And I welcome that, and I believe in it. I don't know where it comes from, but it's coming from a good place. And my job is to get out of the way. And I know you guys do that too. And, that's sacred work. We are privileged. We are privileged to have the opportunity and the ability to do it.
Indeed, yes. It's a gift to have these kind of conversations, and to just imbibe all you have to offer, Keith. And thank you so much. I'm just delighted to know you're out there and doing what you're doing, and it's been a lot of fun.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, you guys.
Yeah, look forward to seeing you again in our therapy group. I was thinking, why was I invited to that group? And they're probably, they realize that I need therapy. That's why
yeah, right. We want your wisdom. That's why we want your love and your wisdom and your integrity. That's what your authenticity. That's why you were invited. And that's why I'm delighted that you're in our group. That's why.
Well, thanks so much, Keith. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank everyone for being here with us and being part of this. God bless.
Much love to everybody.